for Welsh Government. And Ron, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Rick. Carla, can you do the slides rather than sharing screens? That easy? Or is it easier to share the screen? Carla?
Oh, sorry, it's me who's doing the slides. What do you need?
Sorry, just the next slide, please, Alex. Just the one over from this one.
That's it. Thank you. I'll just ask for the next slide as we go through.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm Ron Loveland, Energy Advisor to the Welsh Government. Most of you, I think, will know me, interacted with me at some time over the last 30 or 40 years on the energy and innovation scene in Wales. I'm currently Government Energy Advisor to the Welsh Government, basically trying to both act as a bridge between the real world and the policy world, and also looking forward to seeing what the energy world would look like over the next 5, 10, 15 years, not just in Wales, but in the UK and further afield. And when you do that, you realize that there are 3 big revolutions underway. The first is around digitalization and smart systems. The second is around local energy. And the third is around the whole net zero decarbonisation agenda. If I could have the next slide, please. First, then, skipping over smart, which I'm sure we'll come back to later anyway. The local energy agenda. We are moving to a world where we're not thinking about things from a top-down perspective. We're thinking very much from a bottom-up perspective that's driven by a whole raft of things, including the smarter digitalization agenda, but also by the marriage of power, heat and transport and industrial decarbonisation at the local level. So you start by thinking about what's happening in our homes and businesses. You then balance at the local level as far as possible before balancing at the regional level and then the national level. And that gives you a very different way of looking at things. And it is very, as it's said, as it's titled here, very citizen-centric. If I could have the next slide. The other big revolution is the net zero revolution, which is really about looking at the world through a systems of systems lens. Now, many of you will be aware of the various sort of regional energy studies, including yours, where you've been working with Jane and others and the Welsh Government Energy Service. And that's against the 2035 timeline. There's the WWU exercise at the moment, which is on a longer timeline but hasn't yet been published. There's the WPD exercise, which is within the Rio 2 framework, which has a 2028 timeline. But I want to focus this morning on just give you a glimpse of the Zero 2050 South Wales study. That's been going on for the last 2 or 3 years, very much driven by National Grid and Arup, with a lot of stakeholders. It's a systems of systems study, and that slide shows you the various work packages which are underway, including city decarbonisation from Cardiff University, and you have direct access to that because I understand you're closely working with Flexus anyway. The transport sector is being looked at by BMT, industrial cluster decarbonisation by CR+, the whole world of renewable energy by digital engineering, other electricity generation or low carbon generation has been supported by work by Regen. Burns and McDonald have looked at networks, and Progressive Energy have looked at gas networks, including the hydrogen world. And then that's been backed up by a very strong optimization model called Caerphilly, which Arup has developed and is using more generally as a result of this work. It's been validated by the Pathfinder work of WWU with the support of progressive energy. And then there has been a couple of socio-economic analyses. So next slide, please. So what does that show? That very intense work has shown that we need a much higher level of renewable energy. We need to do much more domestic and commercial properties. Industrial demand is clearly a big problem, and hydrogen should play a big role in that. Transport demand, which you know as well as I, and then there's the question of the balance between what we're doing here and what is happening in the rest of the UK, because we are still very much part of the UK system. If I could have the next slide, please. These are the general outline findings, and more detail will be available when the report is published in July. The first on onshore renewables. Now, nothing surprising about that except the scale. If you look at your regional energy strategy, you'll see what looks to be a significant target for more wind and solar in Southeast Wales. But actually, this study is showing across South Wales we may need another 5 gigawatts of onshore wind and another 5 gigawatts of solar power when we move away from a fossil fuel system, which on an a priori basis would mean in the Cardiff City region another 3 gigawatts of onshore wind and another 3 gigawatts of solar, which is no mean challenge. Clearly, we want to reuse in this existing networks. We need storage to deal with the periods of no wind, no sun, and hydrogen looks to come into its own in that world. But clearly, you need to produce it, and there is a big debate as to whether that should be by green hydrogen or blue hydrogen. Energy demand is still the no-brainer in all of this, and the heat will be mostly come from a combination of district heating, heat pumps, and hydrogen boilers. Energy demand is clearly reduced through energy efficiency, and transport energy is mostly met by electrification. But for heavy vehicles, shipping, and other modes of transport, there should be a strong role for hydrogen or hydrogen in the form of ammonia. If I could have the next slide, please. Now, if you look at this work, you come up with a number of low regrets measures, which is really, I suppose, what I'd like to focus perhaps on when we get to questions and answers in terms of the remit of this workshop. As I mentioned, onshore wind, we need a lot more onshore wind and solar. We need a major residential retrofit program, and clearly the optimization work that we're all involved in is relevant there. Heat pumps will be important, whether in the form of small heat pumps for hybrid systems or bigger heat pumps for whole buildings changes, and therefore, looking for supply chains in that world makes a great deal of sense. We need to incentivize commercial and industrial energy efficiency, both on an inside and behind the meter approach, and by looking at co-location opportunities. Jane, for example, has been involved in the public sector work on the major energy program, looking at opportunities for benefits between co-located sites. Demand side response, shifting time use is going to be very key, and there are a number of very innovative companies already playing in that field, including Octopus. We need to pilot hydrogen production, whether through steam methane reforming or electrolysis. This is not particularly relevant in the context of today, but hydrogen salt cavern storage somewhere in the UK is going to be very important from the storage perspective. We need to transition in due course the networks to use hydrogen. unless all the work that's being done at the moment indicates that that's not feasible. And then there's the important word of EV charging and how we generally come to terms with cars in the future. And as you know, we have a climate change minister in the form of Lee Waters, who's very, very interested in all of this. If I could have the next slide, please, and final slide. But all of that work, as the authors you will see from the authors when the report is published, hopefully later on in July, provides a vision, but there's a lot that we don't know, and that Zero 2050 South Wales initiative is very much suggesting we look at adaptive pathways and look at other things which could well provide sort of tipping points and need to be carefully monitored. And these include the cost of offshore wind, decarbonisation approach beyond South Wales, which I think particularly takes us into the world of carbon capture and storage, the possibility of hydrogen imports, where we will actually be going on the cost of carbon, what will happen with the cost of hydrogen, and the business models for hydrogen and CCS opportunities. And that one includes the availability of CO2 shipping from South Wales, which isn't particularly high up on the agenda of BEIS at the moment. We have to consider the general economic situation and the possibility of various shocks. And then the one that's there, I've added, and you will find hopefully in the final report, which is where we might be going with tidal energy more generally. Thank you, Rick. That's all I wanted to say at the moment. As I say, I'm happy to come back to the least regrets slide at question time. Thank you.
Super, thanks, Rob. That's given us a great overview and set of insights into where we are and what the key issues that we face might be. And what we're going to do now is move immediately through to hear from Rob and Jane, who are going to give us a more focused review of Cardiff Capital Region's energy strategy and some initial provocations and thoughts on where we might see most effective interventions. Without further ado, I'll hand over to Rob and Jane, just with the reminder, if you do have questions, pop them in the chat, and we'll also pause at some point to field one or two questions from the group. But if you could pop them in the chat, that'll give me a sense of where the interest is and when and where we need to pause in the programme. Thanks again, Ron. Over to Jane and Rob.
Thanks, Rick. I'll kick off and Jane will come in a little bit later. And apologies if I start peering over the top of my glasses. I'm taking this call on my phone rather than my laptop, so it's a little bit difficult to see the presentation. But Alex, you're gonna run through the slides for me. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much. So we're just going to give a quick overview of our strategy at CCR and the proposed early interventions that we've come up with over the past few months. But before we do that, if we can just give WGS a quick plug, really, and then Jane will come on to this in a bit more detail later. But I've got to really thank the WGS. They've been fantastic. Their ambition across the region is to drive us all to a carbon net zero economy. And Jane and her colleagues have been instrumental in providing support to CCR and largely responsible for the strategy that we've come up with and the implementation plan that we're working on now. So really key partnership that we struck up with the WGES, and they offer a whole range of technical support and advice, procurement and technical knowledge of the sectors that we're talking about here today. So thanks very much, Jane. But if I can swiftly move on to our energy vision for CCR. So back in 2019, December 2019, the CCR Regional Cabinet jointly not acknowledged, and the Cabinet is a group of 10 authorities in South East Wales across the Cardiff region. they all acknowledged that there was a major transformation required in their attitude and delivery of implementation and actions against the decarbonisation plan for each individual authority, but also for a region. So collectively at that point, they agreed to set a vision, which I've got there on the slide, which was to create the conditions for a shift to a carbon neutral economy and society in CCR, growing our regional income whilst maintaining guardianship of the environment through a laser focus on clean growth. And that's something that we've established early on, and we've stuck to it. Nothing's changed. It's still very much our focus and our drive as we move through to the implementation phase of our strategy. And in terms of our priorities, I've just listed them down there, and they're pretty much as you'd expect to see them. Energy efficiency and heat, electricity and flexibility, decarbonisation of transport, and obviously coupled with that, we had to make sure that we've got good coordination around planning, regional support, ownership for the plan. And then of course, the biggest one, I guess, to couple those more traditional decarbonisation priorities, because we are a growth deal, CCR, is all about business generation and job creation. So if you look at our strategy and you get time to browse the 72 pages after the workshop, you'll see that there's a huge section in there on the potential opportunities around job creation. If we manage to get this right and we manage to decarbonise as we plan to, this of course has got a huge amount of opportunity to deliver against the CCR ambitions, 25,000 jobs to be created, £4 billion worth of private sector leverage, and 5% enhancement on GVA. So we see the energy sector and the challenge which we've signed up to with this energy vision as a major opportunity to deliver against that ambition. We just move on. Thanks, Alex. So the next slide is a bit busy, but it essentially, if you haven't got time to read those 72 pages of strategy, this really gives you a good insight into what it's all about in a very short space of time. So in terms of the baseline assessment that was undertaken, there's a few key areas. I won't dwell on all of them, but a few key ones. CCR consumed 36% of the total energy consumed in Wales. CCR region hosts 22% of the renewable energy capacity. 90% of homes are connected to the gas network currently, and 0.2% use biomass boiler, which is incredible. I was incredibly surprised by the slight amount that stat revealed. CCR have 709 megawatts of renewable energy installed in the region. 31% is locally owned. And our total energy consumption fell 22% between 2005 and 13. And our energy system fell by 35% between 2005 and 17. So clearly quite revealing stats that have been incorporated within our strategy. So in order to actually achieve our vision going forward for 2035, we need to reduce by 55%, and onwards to 2050, we need to reduce to be on track for that 2035 target. Now, in terms of the breakdown between the three major themes of our strategy, transport is 60%, domestic heat and power 51%, and commercial and industrial 54%. Jane tells me that this is not too dissimilar to the rest of the regions around the UK, but clearly we've got quite a big transport problem in the region, particularly with the M4 going right through the centre of it. So we've probably got a higher transport opportunity or challenge, whatever way you look at it, in our region as opposed to some of the other areas around Wales. And as I mentioned, in terms of jobs, if we get this right and we start delivering the level of intervention and investment required, we should be able to create a huge amount of jobs and increase GVA. But the budget for delivering this is around 8.6 billion, which is roughly 4 billion more than we currently spend at the moment in terms of business as usual. So a huge amount of private sector investment required to actually deliver against this agenda. Next slide, please, Alex. So what we're doing now with the Welsh Government Energy Service is assessing the requirements for deploying a range of investments and intervention. And that is a top-down, bottom-up analysis from the strategy, that we compiled over the last 12 to 18 months, which was built up with over 100 people being involved in the stakeholder engagement sessions. And what we intend to do now is apply critical success criteria to that strategy to try and draw out a list of potential interventions and actions. Now, not all of those interventions are going to revolve around a significant requirement for capital investment. There will also be opportunities for further R&D, opportunities for challenge fund opportunities with CCR's £10 million challenge fund, and all sorts of work in addition to pure capital investment. We probably see one significant area of demand against our strategy is going to be around skills, opportunity and policy shift. So a huge amount of lobbying requirement with UK and Welsh government. Next slide, please, Alex. So just to give you a feel for what we've already thought about up over the next few months. And a key thing to remember here is that we as a CCR will be moving into a corporate joint committee in February next year, which will give us a huge amount of opportunity around additional funding mechanisms. But up until that point, clearly, we can't wait for bureaucracy and paperwork to take shape around that corporate joint committee. So we've come up with a few areas of priority, which I'll quickly run through. Decarbonisation of transport is a major area that we're already focusing on with Metro Plus, Metro Central, our CCR ULEV programme, Try Before You Buy taxi service. And of course, Jane will come on to this a little bit later. We've got the LEV Fleet Challenge as well. In addition to that, we're looking at potential hydrogen demonstration fund to couple with that LEV Fleet Challenge. From a commercial and decarbonisation perspective on industry, we're looking at opportunities around Aberthaw Power Station. It's probably public knowledge by now, but we've put an expression of interest into the UK Atomic Energy initiative through STEP to repurpose Aberthaw Power Station for atomic energy. 15 sites have been shortlisted across the UK so far, and we're one of those shortlisted sites. So we're doing a piece of work around that at the moment in terms of due diligence to understand the real potential for a nuclear or a UK atomic energy site at Aberthaw. Other sites of interest in Wales are Milford Haven and Gloucester, so there is stiff competition, and also some other sites around the UK. So it's not a foregone conclusion, but of course, if we can make significant inroads into that project, that will go a long way to delivering our commercial and industrial decarbonisation targets. From a domestic perspective, we're putting a bid into the for optimised domestic retrofit to the community renewal programme. Probably won't be doing that this year because the allocations are already full, but we'll be putting a bid in for next year, which will see us significantly ramp up our opportunities around decarbonisation on our retrofit programme. And in terms of renewable energy, we're developing a framework of local energy generation schemes across the region with local partners and authorities. Next slide. I think this is the final slide for me. Thanks, Alex. In terms of, Rob mentioned the power of data and the importance of data, and that's something as a regional authority we're certainly mindful of. So we're in the process of partnering with Flexis to understand the potential for digital twinning in a much greater level of detail. We're also signing up to the Carbon Disclosure Project leading up to COP26. Flexis have already signed up the region on behalf of CCR to COP26, and a prerequisite of that in terms of getting a much higher profile is that we sign up to CDP. This is clearly coupling with the new Welsh Government requirements for disclosing your carbon agenda and targets and progress. So that's something we're going to be doing with Flexis. We're looking at developing a smart grid and multi-vector energy system, so working with the BRE and the Cardiff School of Engineering to develop that further. And of course, all of this is nothing without funding, so we'll be looking to draw on opportunities within the CCR wider investment fund, but also, and probably more importantly, developing relationships with a new UK infrastructure bank and really starting to create some robust opportunities and dangling some significant carrots in front of the bank that can start eating into that £8.6 billion price tag we put on our development of decarbonisation across the CCR. I think that's probably me for a general overview of the CCR energy strategy and early plans. Jane, do you want to come in with more details around the baseline on fleet?
Great, thank you, Rob. So picking up on Rick's introduction, and hopefully you're getting a sense of the kind of challenges we're facing on the decarb journey. Some of the data I'm going to share hopefully might trigger that provocation, that response. So just to pick up the themes that have been shared so far, I wanted to share some of the core bits of data. So as you heard from what Rob just shared, roughly we've got transport, commercial, industrial and domestic in thirds as decarb challenges. We've got 31 terawatt hours of energy in the region. I'm not going to go through the whole of that slide, but the reason I'm just picking on that top left hand pie chart is that compared to Mid Wales, for instance, they're only consuming 5 terawatt hours. So you perhaps get a sense of scale for Cardiff City Region's impact. And in terms of decarbonisation, the next pie chart over, really, we've only decarbonised something like 50% of the electricity grid, and the rest of that pie chart, which has got coal, petroleum products and gas, we are a long way off doing anything meaningful at the moment. I know we've got plans, but just to try and show you, really, when you see it, all we've done is manage to decarb the grid so far. And there's a wealth of data. Obviously, we can share these slides afterwards, but you can see the high dependency we have on gas. Obviously, there are plans from Wales and West Utilities to get into a decarbonisation journey with hydrogen for South Wales. But each of those is the local authorities in Wales with the houses that are dependent on gas. So I'm going to flick through some stats, but hope you can see we have got a lot of data we can share. So next slide, please, Alex. And picking up in particular the challenges that Rob just highlighted from that vision statement, we've picked out 5 themes that we're unpacking in thematic workshops, and thank you to those of you on the call that have been part of that work, and we welcome thoughts from all of you. So this is taking the region on a decarb journey out to 2035 with a view to being net zero by 2050. So these are sort of like halfway points on those actions, and you can see for domestic and energy efficiency, we've got to transition. I mean, we've expressed it as heat pumps, but obviously we do need to understand what the viability of Wales and West proposition is with hydrogen. Heat pumps and energy efficiency, we've got something like 150,000 homes that we're trying to move out to 2035 away from currently very poor EPC ratings into something that's much more energy efficient. And then from a road transport perspective, looking at this, that works out at something like 15,000 electric vehicles for each of the years between now and 2030 that need to transition. And of course, all the associated infrastructure we need with that as well. You've heard about the challenge with renewable electricity. So in the modelling we've done, we're needing something like 2.5 gigawatts to get us on track for that carbon neutral and trying to be a bit more self-sufficient in the region. We have actually got a strong pipeline of projects that have potential. I think a big problem for us is sorting out the grid. And it has been mentioned in for instance, Ron's slide, but commercial and industrial, obviously we've got strong progress now with the likes of Flexis and the South Wales Industrial Cluster. But if we're looking at how commercial industrial premises operate, we need to look at their energy efficiency and how we can help them move away from a dependency on fossil fuels. So they're the 5 key highlights. So hopefully those are getting you thoughtful about the kinds of interventions we might need to deliver on that journey. Next slide, please, Alex. And I'll just quickly put this up because I thought it was interesting. From the regional work we've been doing, you can see that Cardiff Capital Region has got its carbon impact is skewed towards transport. And obviously we have got the M4, but we have got more work to do on transport than the other sectors and the other regions. So thank you. Next slide. So we've done a lot of work as the Welsh Government Energy Service on the fleets across 34 public sector bodies. And yesterday we had a quick challenge session with the KTN. So the Knowledge Transfer Network has worked with some of you that are on today's call with looking at how we might draw out some particular innovation challenges. But if I share with you some statistics, again, next slide, please, Alex, some headlines. So from the survey work we've done, we've got something like 15,000 vehicles in public sector ownership across the 30 odd public bodies, and they're travelling 127 million miles a year. And for those that are sharp-eyed, that shouldn't be 32 million tonnes, it should be 87,000 tonnes, but there's still significant tonnes of CO2 being emitted. So this is in Welsh Government policy ambition for this area, is that the public sector would have transitioned all its cars and vans by 2025 and all its HGVs by 2030. And that's actually within the decision timeframe of fleet managers now. So the point is we really need to get on with this transition to meet those targets. So next slide. So we have engaged with 34 public bodies. They each get 3 reports. So they get something about their fleet, the individual fleets that are in their sort of company ownership. And then there's also the staff mileage. And of course, this is part of the Welsh Government reporting obligations as well now. And then we also provide infrastructure studies. This is how able an authority is to charge its vehicles at depots, which is another problem. Next slide. So this is an example slide from one of our authorities in the southeast, and you can see there that the blue and red is the usage of the building, and the top green line is the capacity that is available to that building from its existing connection with Western Power. And obviously the ability of energy to charge cars or vans is the pale green and the dark green. And in this instance, there's very little headroom. You could only actually charge one small van. So this is proving problematic and potentially very costly for many of the authorities. I mean, as a service, we're looking at how we can help build in renewables and possibly battery storage, but this is certainly an area of challenge. Next one, please. And this is just an example from one of the local authorities, but you can see there as well. So there's an example on the grey fleet, something like just short of 2 million miles being driven. And this was obviously pre-COVID. We took data because that was the realistic data that we've got available to us. I think there is an interesting challenge around how we can perhaps keep mileage down as we return to work, whilst obviously maintaining public service. Next slide, please. And each authority gets a summary slide. And the reason I popped this one in for Conwy is an example that actually, even though you can see the number of vehicles they've got there, like 416 vehicles, to my mind, it's quite a modest, it's only 1 megawatt wind turbine would actually suffice to give all the electricity that's needed. It's just organising that. And we can prove very good cost efficiency for a local authority because there's something like 75% reduction in energy costs by swapping from diesel to electric. And that's the logic for making the decision on a whole life cost basis. Thank you. So I think my next slide, please, Alex. I think that's it just for the fleet quick overview. My last couple of slides are just around the huge challenge we've got on decarbonising heat. So from the strategy you've seen, we've got some thematic actions that we're hoping for. Next slide, please, Alex. So this is an example of the transition that's needed in the next 15 years. And at the moment, we're modelling, as we said, air source heat pumps. And we do need to understand how this dovetails with Wales and West. We've learnt that they need 40% of their customer base to stay on gas to make hydrogen, as they replace the gas with hydrogen, for the hydrogen to be cost efficient. That's a figure they've offered at the moment. But I think we also need to look seriously at where we might have district heating provision, especially where we've got waste industrial heat that we might be able to bank on. So there's that analysis to do, and also that would tie in to local area energy planning. Next slide, please. And here you've got an example of how we see commercial and industrial energy consumption reducing. That reduction is based largely on national efforts to decarbonise the grid. So really, out to 2035, we're not really showing a lot of innovation here. So if there's chance to do something that helps move C&I away from use of gas and coal and petroleum, obviously there's a hope that by the end of this period, hydrogen will start to emerge, but anything that can accelerate that. Thank you. And I think that was my last slide. Thank you.
Okay, super. Thanks, thanks, Rob and Jane. We're going to pause here because we've been presented with quite a lot of information. Just to take a moment and to invite questions at this point in the workshop. Thanks, Alex. I've got one in the chat here from Pearl. And let me read this one out, and then I can see Kev's going to come in. So Pearl asks, understand that energy is a huge part of decarbonisation, so this all looks really good. How does food and agriculture fit into the picture? Would lower carbon production and consumption practices be considered as a priority within the decarbonisation workstream of the Challenge Fund? Well, I guess actually that's probably one for people managing the Challenge Fund rather than our speakers, and I'll invite Gareth to comment as well, but in simple terms, yes, the answer. And indeed, we have had encouraging discussions with Cardiff and Monmouthshire councils around a food challenge, which carries a decarbonisation component potentially. And Pearl, we'd be happy to follow up with you and let you know a little bit more about that subsequently, if that's of interest to you. Kev.
Thanks, Rick. A question for Ron. Thanks for the presentation, Ron. Absolutely excellent. My question is, it raises kind of mind-boggling levels of coordination required to get to net zero, and as well as the large investments that need to be mobilized. I thought there was one challenge that seems to me even greater than the financial challenge, which was what I might call, the inter-organizational capacity challenge. To what extent is Welsh Government already involved in kind of granular discussions with CCR region and other regions about getting to net zero?
Okay. I think that's on the agenda. I mean, as far as the Welsh Government is concerned, clearly a lot of work is now going on in conjunction with people like the Welsh Government Energy Service to produce a plan. Because as you say, we have mind-boggling challenges, and it doesn't make sense not to have an overall strategic plan, which is what we're expecting to emerge through our sort of decarbonisation document that we will then feed into the COP26 sort of process. It requires a partnership between all levels of government, UK government, Welsh government and local authority government. It requires not only, I was listening to Prince Charles earlier this morning about all that's happening on the finance front, and there's a whole raft of money ready to come in, but you need good projects. And for good projects, you need financial returns, and for financial returns, you need good markets. So it all comes back to consumers and citizens being willing to buy the new products and services or use the new products and services to take us into the net zero world. So it's a very complicated systems of systems, a whole systems challenge, but you're absolutely right. It needs a tremendous level of coordination, and that's being worked on. And clearly, with our new climate change ministers, Julie James and Lee Waters, Julie knows the local authority world extremely well, as does Lee, and I think I can assure you that that in that way of the importance of joint Welsh Government local authority working will be a strong priority.
Thanks, Rob. I can see Rob has his hand up, and I was actually going to ask Rob a question, so I'll pop that to you, Rob, and then you can comment in the way you were intending and perhaps address the question. So my question was, you gave us a great overview of the strategy and where the various priorities lie. Could you just give us a little bit more of a flavour of where conversations have got to in addressing some of those issues? Where have you been having positive conversations? And perhaps just as important, where are you really hoping to see ideas come forward that perhaps have not yet really sort of been brought to your attention? Thanks, Rob.
Yeah, no problem. I probably should have mentioned during my presentation, one of the key areas that we're doing of work that we're undertaking at the moment with Welsh Government Energy Service is an evaluation of the strategy, and that takes the shape of a whole range of thematic workshops. So workshops have already been undertaken with regards to transport, renewable energy, commercial and industrial and domestic. And that's all about trying to do that top-down, bottom-up analysis of what's already going on in the region and what potentially could be scaled, and what the baseline information and all the analysis that went into compiling the strategy is telling us in terms of opportunity. And off the back of that, we're really starting to get a feel for where the interventions are and where the opportunities exist. And there's going to be multiple areas where we can follow up on, and we're already getting some further discussions underway off the back of those original thematic workshops to really start to hone down the level of opportunity, but also the challenge. And Kevin's dead right, of course, in terms of resource. That's the next challenge on top of finding the budget to deal with these problems. We're having thoughts within CCR about the creation of an energy agency, for want of a better description, something that would have both the strategic and the operational capacity and resource sat behind it to be able to implement some of these programs of work. From our discussions with local authorities, they're all very much signed up to the desire to deliver against this agenda, politically at least. From an operational perspective, it's of course much more difficult. And without exception, each of those authorities would welcome the opportunity to have some scale up, some centralization, some standardization, try and do it at scale rather than individually. We'll probably cover off more ground that way. So opportunities are emerging, big and small, short and medium term and long term. And we're going to have to start building those up into really robust feasibilities and option appraisals, so we can dangle those carrots in front of the funding organisations and really start to make some implementation.
Great, thanks, Rob. I'm going to move us along now and introduce James Penfold from Caerphilly Council. Really pleased to have James join us, and James is providing a neat segue as we move from the overviews that Ron and Rob and Jane have given us to look at a specific issue that a local authority within the Cardiff Capital Region is looking at and addressing. And as Rob just said at the end there, I'm hoping and expecting James will agree, we're really keen to see collaboration with these challenge proposals, because there's more capacity in the system. If people work together, there's more potential for scaling commercial outcomes and sharing the benefits of a challenge that's successful. So it's very much in that spirit that James has come along to share his initial ideas, and we're very grateful to you, James, for that. Over to you.
Thanks, Rick. That's great. Hi, everybody. I'm James. I'm part of the transformation team here at Caerphilly County Borough Council, and we're currently working with the Challenge Fund team on a challenge related to charging electric vehicles. So I'm just going to talk to you today about how we developed that idea, why it matters to us, and what we're hoping to do next to actually tackle that challenge. So I think Alex has got a few presentation slides, so you can look at those rather than me. Thanks, Alex.
There we go.
Oh, there we go. Can we go on to the next one as well, then, please, Alex? Cheers. Oh, fabulous. Right, back before Christmas, we were recovering from a year of lockdown. We were wanting to capitalise on some of the collaborative work we've done as a council, and the fast pace of change that had characterised our response to the pandemic as well. And we saw the Challenge Fund as something that could help us build on our successes in a post-COVID world. So first, we gathered a selection of senior staff and people involved in transformation work. And it's really important to get buy-in from the top for this kind of thing. And we discussed some ideas. We're after big ticket problems where we thought we could make a real difference if we concentrated on something specific. We came out of that session with a whole handful of ideas, and some were more specific than others. For example, one of the challenges was poverty. Could we solve poverty? That's a great example of something that needs refining to be a little more specific. Digital inclusion was another as well. And now we refined our anti-poverty and digital inclusion ideas a little bit further, but the ideas we had, they weren't the right fit for the Challenge Fund specifically, and they didn't go that far, and that's okay as well, because you're going to have ideas that don't have as much future as some of the other ideas you might develop. So it's good to have too many and then refine them down. But one of the ideas in that initial session had more legs. How do people living on our terrace streets with no off-road charging, how do they charge electric cars as we move to use more electric cars in the future? So to refine that idea, we brought a load of people together, and there's a lot of different services across the council that actually play a little part in defining this idea. So we had them together for a couple of sessions, and we included people from our fleet service who manage our own vehicles. We had people there from infrastructure who've been installing some of our chargers in our car parks recently. We had the procurement guys on board as well. Really important to get those involved early on, so we can identify opportunities to find routes to market for some of the equipment or new things we might want to develop as part of our challenge. And we had people from our policy team as well. They lead on our decarbonisation strategy. They're linked into a lot of other local authorities and other public sector bodies who are working towards decarbonisation aims together. And one of the first points of discussion was, is electric vehicle charging even anything we should be involved in at all? The council doesn't run any petrol stations, so why would we be installing electric charging points? People asked, why are we doing this when Elon Musk is going to solve this problem for us anyway? Won't Tesla and Shell and other companies develop better batteries, faster chargers before we actually need to develop anything ourselves? That's a good question. And we also discussed what the future of transport might look like in a post-COVID world. We've got people working from home easily now, and as a council, we're promoting active travel alternatives. We're building cycle routes around the country, around the county. So do people even need to own cars at all, electric or otherwise? Will people see transport as a service in the future? And will they use Uber for all their journeys instead of owning a car at all? And we've also got some people in the team who are evangelical about hydrogen fuel as a fuel for future vehicles instead of electricity. And we heard about some of the pros and cons of hydrogen earlier on. So we had to be really, really clear about what we were trying to achieve, and talking to all of those people, listening to their ideas and actually discussing them together helped us refine what we were trying to achieve, exactly what the problem ahead of us was. So we know these facts. Petrol and diesel vehicles are being phased out. So even if people with no off-road parking at home are perhaps less likely to be early adopters of electric vehicles are going to become more common. We, as a council, we are committed to replacing our diesel fleet with electric vehicles over the coming years. We're starting to do that right now. And we need to make sure that they're charged to deliver public services. We've declared a climate emergency too. We're committed to decarbonisation. We want to work with our residents for a greener Caerphilly, with our neighbours for a greener Wales and a greener world as well, of course. And so far to date, the private sector hasn't produced a solution to electric vehicle charging other than relying on off-road parking at home or the ability to leave a vehicle in a car park for hours. And that's not right for everybody. So Alex, could you move on to the next slide, please? Let's be specific about our challenge. Thanks, Alex. Two main points. Our electric vehicle fleet, we are replacing our diesel fleet with electric vehicles. We've got 200 vehicles coming to us over the next, electric vehicles coming to us over the next year and a half. Mainly small vans and cars, the kind of vehicles that are often kept at staff homes overnight. So we need them charged for work. We've got some chargers in office car parks, and we can have a rotor for charging as well, but that's likely to not be enough. And we're not stopping at 200 either. We've currently got a fleet of around 500 vehicles. We think we can reduce that total number altogether anyway, but we intend to get rid of all of the diesel vehicles eventually. We've recently polled about 140 people in our housing team, and they currently use cars and small vans, and pretty much all of them take them home overnight. And we asked them if they'd be interested in having a charger at home. Not a single one of them said no. They're all open to the idea of using electric vehicles, and some of them, in fact, already had them where they've got off-road parking at home. Which brings us on to our homes. We've got a lot of terraced housing in Caerphilly, and that's the case across South Wales as well, with no space off-road to park. You often can't guarantee even being able to park outside your own home on the street either. So we know that some terraces have off-road parking and some semi-detached and detached homes don't, but it's the stereotypical Welsh Valleys terrace that we're thinking of as the main issue for our challenge. So there's our refined challenge. We've got it in one sentence now, and that we're clear about what we're trying to do. How can we keep our own fleet charged for work and encourage our residents to choose electric vehicles by removing barriers to home charging? That's our refined challenge. So could I have the next slide, please, Alex? Now, if you can see this picture on the right sums up the issue here. It's this kind of street we're thinking of. This photo was taken just a couple of weeks ago by one of our team who was out for an evening stroll. Now, it's an innovative solution to the problem that this resident has, but we really think there can be a better option than this. We don't want cables across pavements, on the ground or overhead like this. And it's important to note that in refining our idea, we had to constantly remind ourselves not to solutionize. We don't want to jump to solutions before we're sure about what we're trying to achieve. But the discussions naturally brought out some suggestions about the type of avenue we might go down. So that helps us to start to think about who we might want to work with. We looked at on-street charging options that are available at the moment, some of them. Lampposts, you can charge a car from a lamppost, but there aren't enough lampposts to go round, and they need some cabling work to go in there as well. You might get half a dozen lampposts for a street of 30 homes. That's clearly not enough. We discussed pop-up chargers, which can be embedded in the pavement or in the street. They're very expensive to install and disruptive, but perhaps. We've discussed the possibility of local charging hubs. Could we look at using small parcels of council-owned land, big enough for 2 or 3 chargers, within easy walking distance of several streets, so that people could perhaps plug in after work, walk home for tea, and then go and collect their car charged? Now, would people use these fairly? Would they just park diesel cars there because there's a space there to park? Possibly. We talked about the role that small businesses might play locally as well. Things like corner shops and pubs with small car parks next to them. Could they install chargers for nearby residents and their customers to use, with the business then getting a cut of the charging fee? Is that an option? That's one of the things we've tossed around as an idea. Faster chargers. Charger technology is going to get better, undoubtedly. Elon Musk's going to do that for us. That's one of the things that's going to happen. It's going to take some time, though. So should we as a council lead the way in getting the fastest chargers on the market today into our car parks to make owning electric vehicles more of a viable option for people who can't leave their car for long periods to charge them up? It's a possible but more expensive option. Ultimately, these last 2 questions are the most important ones, and I think are our next steps as well, definitely. We know we're not the only ones with this problem. We know the rest of the region, if not the world, is facing the same issue, and we'd love to work together to tackle it. So which of our neighbours can we work with to try some things out in our local areas? And secondly, building a Welsh supply chain. What's being built in Wales at the moment? Who's supplying chargers at the moment? There are fewer companies in Wales than England that are involved in electric vehicle charging work, and this could be a real opportunity to work to create jobs in the electric vehicle industry in South Wales. So that's our next step. Who can we work with? What ideas can we test? And can we take on this challenge and do better than, well, this resident and their charger on a stick?
Thanks,
Thank,
James.
No, thanks, Rick. I was just going to say 3 main takeaway points from our experience so far is A, to get buy-in from the top. It was really important to involve our head of service, our directors right at the start and get their ideas. Secondly, talk to everybody who might be able to help within your team and your neighbours as well, and listen to their ideas. And thirdly, fill in that expression of interest form and talk to the Challenge Fund team. Do that as early as possible, even if you haven't got a clearly defined challenge yet, because there's lots of help available from Rick and the team.
Great. Thank you very much, James. Sorry, I thought you were just pausing there, but you gave a perfect final set of comments that we would certainly endorse and encourage people interested in developing a challenge to talk to us and talk to each other, including James. As he said, these are challenges that are likely to be shared across the city region, and there's a lot of value in collaboration. And just in taking the opportunity to respond to a question that appeared in the chat a little earlier, the challenge needs to be owned by an organisation that's active in the Cardiff Capital Region, but collaboration can be with actors beyond the region, and innovation solutions can be offered from anywhere. Obviously, the best innovative solutions are what we're looking for, and we certainly hope that amongst those will be ideas that come from within the region, but there's no constraint on that. Do we have any particular questions or comments for James at this point? We've got one in from Marcia. Thanks, Marcia. Let me just read this out. James, you're probably aware that Cardiff had very similar questions a few years ago and commissioned some work from Jacobs. Things have moved on since, but maybe a neighbour worth talking to. Thanks, Marcia. James, I don't know whether you're aware of that, or we can follow up.
Yeah, yes, please. It'd be great to speak to everybody we can. We know that our neighbours here have looked into this in the past as well, about not just charging on the street, but charging their own fleet in particular. And we know that's a major challenge ahead of the public sector in the coming years. So yeah, we're happy to work with absolutely everybody.
Great, thanks, Marcia. Maybe you could either direct message James or contact the team, and we can pass on some information. That would be really helpful. Any other comments or questions at this stage, colleagues, or we'll move on to the sort of second half of the workshop, which is to facilitate introductions of people that you've met today you aren't known to already. I think that was the main observation I'd make. Irvan, you were in our group. We got the chance to ask you a couple of the more technical questions in the group. So I think I'll leave it there given the time.
Yeah. Anyone else from some of the other groups? Any key points, any key challenges that you would like to share with us?
I suppose the other broader point that came up that's worth just sharing was the interest in and new recognition of the amount of data that are actually available that might be of potential use. And so again, if you were in that group who've got a new understanding of the data that are available and might be useful and need some help navigating those data, I'm sure Irvan and the team will be able to at least set you off in the right direction.
If no one has any comments, can I be naughty and ask Marcia Jones to come off mute and say a few words on innovation side of decarbonization, please, because she has got a lot of experience on her back.
Wow, wasn't expecting that one. I guess, it is, Ron touched on it all this morning. huge challenges. When we look at it as a whole, it can seem quite overwhelming. So it's thinking about the challenges that can stretching but realistic, that can help you on that whole journey. So you've got some clear vision there. What are the pieces that are going to help you get to that, but always within mind as the wider system? But I think also it needs some bite-sized approaches to this as well. So yeah.
I think that's what we've ended up saying to people as they've coming to us to air their ideas about challenges is sometimes that looks a little bit too narrow, and maybe we need to be a bit more inclusive, a bit more ambitious initially, and open up the perspective a little wider. And then conversely, of course, because this is the nature of these things, sometimes people want to try and boil the ocean with the fund that we have available, and we say, look, maybe we can identify some specific strands that might work within a portfolio, or maybe we need to select a particular issue or area, perhaps one that lends itself to piloting and testing rather than, particularly in this space where technological developments and advancements are often very expensive and quite quite lengthy in gestation. I think it's nearer to technological readiness areas, nearer to piloting and testing of technologies that are in development, or or other more social or organisational innovations that might be where the Challenge Fund can contribute. But we're open to ideas and open to different approaches to how the challenge approach might be undertaken. We've got an SBRI model, but we could also consider prizes, innovation partnerships, whichever looks like it might be the most effective approach. And the team are happy to talk to people about which might work best for your particular challenge. Okay, Irvan and Ness, thanks very much, Marcia. That's really helpful on the spot as you were. I think we're out of time. So unless colleagues have any final questions or comments, and Irvan, unless you wanted to add anything to round off the session, I'm going to thank again our speakers and thank in particular Irvan for the high quality input to the discussion during this second half of the workshop. Thanks to you for attending and participating. This was thematic, of course, around decarb. We've got another thematic workshop next week and the week after. You should already have access to that timetable. And if you do have questions and queries about anything to do with the Challenge Fund, please do contact us through the generic email account, and we'll certainly look to connect and follow up with you when we've got information that we think might be of use. So we appreciate your attendance and your time. Thanks again to our speakers, and look forward to hearing from you. So I see Carl has just popped the Challenge Fund email address in the chat there for any of you who haven't got it to hand. Thanks again, and we'll see many of you soon, I'm sure.
Thanks, Rick.
Thanks, Irvan. Really good.